The UN is marking 78 years of service. United Nations Day celebrates the global organisation's charter on October the 24th, 1945. All member states observe the day as a holiday. The focus of this year's celebrations centre around the first Universal Declaration of Human Rights document. It has led to more than 70 human rights treaties and is applied at global and regional levels. So let's bring in Jonathan Wachtel. He's the former spokesman for the US mission to the UN. Great to have you on the program today. Could you tell us more about what UN Day stands for and why it's important?
UN Day, when the United Nations was created in the wake of the awful atrocities of World War II and so much devastation, tens of millions of people died in that conflict. There were high hopes that this would be an organization that would put an end to the horrors that had been experienced, including the Holocaust, and an attempt to build a new world in which we did away with there was another attempt at a UN-like forum before. It failed when World War I broke out, and then was created the League of Nations. The League of Nations was an abject failure when World War II came about, and the calamity that caused, engulfing so many nations into the atrocious bloodshed that happened then, coming out of that with high hopes that humanity would be able to avert wars moving forward and build and enshrine human rights that you had mentioned, and create a new, better world, sort of a utopian vision, because the basic truth is that conflicts have continued since the creation of the United Nations, and it has not disappeared from the face of the earth. And there just are too many flashpoints and too many existing conflicts among people to be able to realize such an aspiration.
And we live in very different times now. Can you talk a bit about how the UN has changed, especially in regards to amplifying the UN's common agenda? How does the UN manage its purposes and principles in, this multipolar world, being that the idea that there are many important global powers, not just a few superpowers?
Yeah, essentially when you're speaking, your question's very broad. The UN has taken on so many different types of projects, from trying to mitigate climate change to eradicating poverty, the Sustainable Development Goals, things outside of the central focus of the strongest body within the UN Security Council. The UN General Assembly has ballooned from what was dozens of countries at the creation of the United Nations to now up 193 member states. With those additions, obviously, other layers, other complications. There's even a UN Space Agency in Vienna, the International Atomic Energy Organization, also in Vienna. Geneva has offices with the Human Rights Council. It's a massive, massive organization with all sorts of focus points. So it's changed dramatically. If we're going to focus on the Security Council, and I don't know what you want to talk about right now, Sally, but the Security Council is essentially a snapshot of the victors of World War II, and then bringing in some additional countries, representation from geographic locations like Africa and South America that weren't part of that initial victory in terms of the Allied forces and China against Japan and the Nazis. So it's not the same world. Calls for reform are important, but impossible to achieve because of the voting patterns within the United Nations of the permanent members of the Security Council, the victors of World War II, who have veto power and really are not, though they'll do lip service that they want to be more accommodating to other nations having a say, really enjoy the benefits of having that veto right.
Just like my question, the UN is a broad institution with a very broad agenda. So can you talk to us a bit about how hard of a job the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who sits in that seat right now, how hard of a job that is? Someone who makes headlines often with impassioned speeches. What does it take to succeed in that role?
Well, I mean, in the case of the UN, for instance, and this conflict, which generates so much passion, by nature, sort of beyond what it is. It's a tiny sliver of land we're talking about. I mean, the state of Israel and the Palestinian territories would fit into a small little corner of China. And the population we're talking about is Chinese populations are massive in cities. We're talking about a really tiny space that in the general scheme of things is a sliver. And if you look at the globe and you look at it, all the maps show Israel and Gaza, and you're thinking you're looking at some massive landmass. It's not. It's very narrow, and there's not much there. But in terms of going back to your question about the significance and difficulty for a Secretary General, absolutely. I mean, look, from the Israeli perspective right now, for instance, they've just suffered the worst since the Holocaust. And the Secretary General is trying to do a dance of trying to give some moral equivalency in the face of that. From an Israeli perspective, it's insane to be talking about peace at this point. It's as if you were asking the United States to negotiate with Al Qaeda after 9/11. It's just a non-starter. It's not going to happen. And Secretary General, looking at the humanitarian situation, the UN devotes a lot of its energy and money and resources and staffing and its existing pinning on activities like its UNRWA organization that looks after Palestinian refugees and the Palestinian population, or UNHCR, or humanitarian OCHA and other departments that help with humanitarian causes. Of course, the UN's going to try to work a balance through this, but it's very easy to step on a rhetorical landmine, as it were, and get yourself into hot water.
Especially in this circumstance this week. Jonathan, thank you very much for your really interesting insight. Jonathan Wachtel, former spokesman for the US mission to the UN.